my fellow Americans? Are we reaping our harvest of greed? Have we built our house on sinking sand? Why are we being ugly Americans?
Good morning, everybody. It's CJ Holmes, founder of Homeowners for Justice, and your host for today's weekdays live show. We've got some pretty interesting news and some great guests on today. So without any hesitation, let's start off with Sheila Bair. She's actually being interviewed about Is Too Big to Fail Over? And she's claiming that the Dodd-Frank Act allows too big to fail to actually fail. So let's listen very closely to what she says and try to figure out what is actually going to happen. We've also got some information about the independent foreclosure review settlement checks and what you need to start paying attention to, some things that happened on that. Lots more information about banks, the market, who to watch, what's going on. I'm going to give you some of my personal advice about real estate. You know, I'm a broker and always looking out actually for the best interest of my clients. And right now, I really don't recommend you buying any property. That's my recommendation, believe it or not. And then we're going to have a couple of guests. Shelly's going to join us on the phone. She went to Tunisia for the World Social Forum. It's really great. We're going to talk to her about, you know, what is actually going on. And there was like 13 countries represented there, and they had like 350 workshops every day. So you couldn't possibly go to everything, but it'll be really great to touch base with her. And Lawrence Lessig, he's with the TED network, and he is explaining to us how we can reclaim the republic. And we need to hear this because we need to reclaim our country. So let's start off with Sheila Bair. Let's see what she has actually to say. It's really fascinating.
So is too big to fail over at this point? Well, in her latest Fortune magazine column, former FDIC chair Sheila Bair says it just might be.
How? Well, Sheila Bair joins us now in her first on CNBC interview to make her case. Always nice to see you. Sheila, make the case for me. First of all, let me simply understand how it is from your calculations in terms of at least the closing of a bank or the taking in of a bank by the FDIC would no longer result in too big to fail.
Well, it still would be a very challenging task, and I want to say at the upfront, I very much support the current regulatory efforts to increase capital requirements, the Volcker rule. I think we need all of that. But I do, yes, think that if a large financial institution failed now, that the FDIC has the tools and a viable strategy for dealing with them. It would be messy, it would be challenging, but they could do it in a way that would not involve systemic disruptions and would not put taxpayers at risk.
So, in other words, the Dodd-Frank legislation, I mean, how does that mandate for the FDIC change the landscape?
Well, during the crisis, we only had the ability to resolve insured banks. So the larger financial organizations were not within the ability of the government to put into a bankruptcy-like process. So Dodd-Frank gave the ability to the FDIC to resolve the entire financial conglomerate, just not the insured bank inside of it. And so basically what the FDIC has said they will do is take control of the holding company of these very complex organizations. The holding company owns everything that's below it. And by taking control of the holding company and continue to fund and keep operational the subsidiaries underneath, they can impose the losses on the shareholders and unsecured creditors at the holding company level, but keep the rest of the organization functioning so you avoid the kind of credit disruptions that we saw, for instance, with the Lehman bankruptcy.
Are you expecting spin-offs of investment banking divisions of the large banks?
You mean now,
Yeah.
or in a resolution process?
Going into this process, going
Right.
into this Dodd-Frank legislation taking effect.
So I think there's going to be more and more market pressure to do that. You know, as Maria, as you know, I've discussed before that the shareholder performance for these very large universal banks has not been good, and I think shareholders are increasingly realizing the management inefficiencies you get from trying to manage these very large conglomerates that are derivatives market makers, they're investment bankers, and they're trying to do commercial banking, consumer banking, and all that. It's just the efficiencies aren't there. They're too hard to manage. So I do think over time we're going to see more shareholder pressure to start breaking those business units up. And I think, yes, separating investment banking from commercial banking is one obvious place to start.
Jill, I never failed to be amazed by the creativity, though, of bankers. I mean, this week I'd love to get your take, particularly on the credit side. I think it was the New York Times had a story about how banks seem to be shifting some of the risk and therefore enhancing their loan loss provisions or their reserves as a result to hedge funds of certain loans.
Right.
I'd love to get your take on that.
Well, you're right. There's a never-ending source of creativity, innovation to try to shift risk, to make it look like you're shifting risk, to boost your capital ratios. And sometimes that's real and sometimes that isn't. We saw with securitization it wasn't real. That we thought that risk was moving off balance sheet, and it wasn't. And this is why regulators really need to be on top of these things. You need to have a dynamic regulatory and supervisory process that can monitor this and act on it very quickly. This particular example, I don't know, but I am skeptical. A lot of these maneuvers to supposedly move risk off balance sheet, because as we saw at the crisis, it's frequently still there, just not as visible.
Something else I also would love to get your take on is Fannie and Freddie. They've been making an awful lot of money lately. And yet we have not seen a great deal of movement in figuring out what we're going to do with them. At this point, all the profits are being swept to the federal government or to the Treasury. But where is that going to change, and how should it change if, in fact, Congress eventually gets around to trying to do something here?
Well, I think there's a real risk that the more it doesn't surprise me that they're profitable again. I mean, they're kind of working through their losses. They're the only game in town right now. They're virtual government monopolies. So it's probably not too hard to make money right now. But I think I'm a markets-oriented person. I would like to see the government get out of most of the housing space and let the market decide how much capital and investment we're going to allocate to housing. I support more of a traditional role of federal government support for veterans and first-time home buyers. But beyond that, let the market and people decide whether they want to own houses and let the market fund it. That's a personal view. I don't think that's what's going to happen in Washington. The housing lobby is very powerful, and people love their government subsidies. So I expect things to bumble along for a while, and we still have Fannie and Freddie and FHA guaranteeing almost 90%, over 90% of new originations.
So what's your sense of the regulatory environment and what it looks like in the coming couple of years here? What do you think is most plausible that will actually take effect and what not? Because, you've got all these regulators, local regulators, global regulators, lots of different rules in terms of capital, in terms of use of complex instruments. How do things change from your standpoint? What do you think?
Well, I think I am disappointed at the pace of Dodd-Frank implementation and the confused, jumbled way it's gone about. And for all the complaining we hear about new regulations, most of them haven't even gone into effect yet. A lot of them haven't even been proposed yet. If I were the regulators, if I were still there, I would prioritize getting capital levels up, better constraints, more effective, simpler constraints on leverage, and making sure we have a viable, robust resolution process so that the market understands that these large institutions get in trouble again, it's on their dime. The taxpayer is not there. That by itself is going to, I think, create pressure again for these large institutions to downsize, because their funding costs are going to go up when bondholders in particular realize that they're at risk, not taxpayers anymore. But those would be my two priorities: ending too big to fail, constraining leverage, and I really hope there are rule proposals out there on now, but they need to be strengthened and finalized.
All right, we'll leave it there. Sheila, always nice to talk with you. Thanks so much.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
We'll see you soon.
Okay, one of my major concerns about that, she's saying that the bondholders, the bank bondholders, are the ones going to be on the hook when these too big to fail institutions gamble away their reserves and don't have that. I wish those people had asked her, hey, what about those bail-in rules now that are in effect that we saw acting in Cyprus? Isn't that going to start taking over? Because I just don't know. One thing that she said just really shocked me. Dodd-Frank's in passed, but none of the regulations virtually have been implemented yet. So a big difference between what people think and what is actually happening. We need to really be aware of these and parse the details. Figure out what is going on and what could happen. That's part of the reason that I keep doing this show every day, is so that you guys and we can think about this and we can figure these things out and really try to, again, protect ourselves and be prepared. I want to bring to you some attention now about the of independent foreclosure review settlement checks. And of course there was a snafu. They didn't, you couldn't cash them. Okay, let's send a check. Oh, whoops, we don't have the money. Anyway, they have talked about these as early difficulties in cashing some of the $3.6 billion checks being distributed to those found to have been disadvantaged in foreclosure proceedings have been resolved. Here's their statement. The paying agent for checks being sent to borrowers under the IFR has assured the Federal Reserve Board that early problems with some checks have been corrected and funds are now available to cash all checks. Now, here's the question, and here's some other issues that really astute readers and followers have sent to me, so I want to share them with you. One is from Fight Foreclosure Fraud. Have you received a settlement check? If so, doesn't that prove that you were due some settlement because of fraud? Okay, so if that's the case, then call the FDC, fax, demand, email, call your representative, and demand that you get the certified letter from the OCC stating what federal and state laws were broken by your servicer, and therefore, what was the reason? Why did they send you some money in the first place? And I agree. I absolutely agree. I think we need to make this a petition. I think this needs to go nationwide. I think that every last one of those checks, those people that got those checks, should be demanding this. Maybe we can demand them on behalf of these other people. I just really don't know. But this sounds like a fabulous Occupy action. It just came to me this morning. I think it's a great idea. Step up and help us implement this if you have some time and energy and effort. Send us your ideas. Send us the petition. Let's get every last one of these with a certified letter. Because listen, these people lost the home. They were either in foreclosure or lost during that period of time. And we already have talked about how many people got cheated because the bank's servicers worked very hard to make sure their foreclosure was not in 2009 and 2010. So I would demand, not only do we get these letters, but let's demand from the OCC that everyone else facing foreclosure has their foreclosure paperwork reviewed. You and I already know that they just faked the paperwork, broke all these laws. We know that this is their pattern of behavior. So let's try to push on this little button. That might really work. Here's something else that was sent to me just this morning. This is on the back of the settlement paper. Evidently, when a person gets a check, they get a settlement letter. And on the back of it, they talk about the tax information. So these settlement checks are possibly taxable. And of course, the independent foreclosure review people, they are not going to advise you. That is not their job. They're going to pay you the money, and then they're going to say the base payment, which may be reportable as income. This is a lump sum payment that does not represent reimbursement of any particular amounts. The entire base payment may be subject to taxation as income depending on the borrower's situation. It could be return of mortgage interest you paid. It could be return of equity on your home. It could be interest on other payment components. It could be return of fees paid. It's your problem to figure it out. And this is, there's 3 responses I've gotten so far from different folks that have gotten checks. This is the first one. I submitted documents to the OCC last year along with attachments of deceptive acts. On the OCC website and the letter I received, it stated if the foreclosure took place 9.5 months after retirement, you would be eligible for additional compensation. I lost my property in 2008, Property went to substitute trustee and servicer Aurora. Bidder was Fannie Mae. Fannie Mae became the owner of the property, sold it to another homeowner in 2010. I received check from Independent Foreclosure Review for a lousy $600. I am homeless, living with relatives in Virginia. Client 2, or response to. I have a client who got $2,000 this morning. It's better than $300, but we're still fighting. Here's a third response. I am not sure if you're aware of this, but people who have received checks from the IFR could have tax consequences, and this writer sent me this link. That's why you're looking at it. This check could be considered income, and these folks, these borrowers, will be receiving 1099s. This person got $6,000, which surprised me because I was certain I would get only $300. This person is not sure if they're going to cash the check. Evidently, on the other side of the letter, it does state, I've not seen a copy of it yet, or I'd share it. It states that this does not, your cashing the check does not remove your rights to sue the bank. And I again encourage everyone that gets one of these checks, demand that the OCC put in a certified letter why you got it, what laws were broken. Let's hammer them with this. Now, as we move on, here's a name that you need to watch. Zandi. Mark Zandi is a chief economist at Moody's Analytics. Now, let's remember, Moody's is one of those ratings agencies that did not stop these banks when they're toxic loans. They said, oh yeah, everything is fine. And they've gotten away with that. I don't understand why they are even in business, but that's just my opinion. When they don't do ratings, they cause such incredible harm around the planet. And now, of course, he is on, if you will, the short list to become the next head of the Federal Housing Finance Agency. That's the regulator of the mortgage finance giants, Fannie and Freddie. And they were taken in public ownership in 2008. And so he's not talking, but obviously he's doing exactly what we see so many people doing at the federal level, and that is they sidle up, they get close, and then they start playing the game with the people in office, and then they get pulled into office, and they're only pretty much thinking about their career, their future. What is my future? It's a revolving door. And we can change that. We're going to talk about that. I'm bringing that into the show today. So some more information, of course, about banking. Bank of America, we just heard last week, I think we taught an article about Chase cutting workers. Okay, we need to cut costs, so let's slash workers. Now, what about slashing CEO pay? There's a thought. Let's slash management. No. They're going to cut workers. That is the point. It always lands on the people. Have you ever noticed? Pretty discouraging to me. And here's something I really wanted to bring to your attention. If you've been watching at all, you know that I analyze markets. You know I talk about when's a good time to buy, when's a good time to sell, what is going on. And I've actually put in writing, I'll just briefly look at that right after this. But this is a very interesting article, and it basically talks about my concern. And that is that we've got a bubble in prices almost around the country. The prices of homes have really bubbled up. It's turned some people right side up again. They could either refinance or they can sell. Some people are doing one of those things. Others haven't even figured that out yet, and they really should, because this may be a bubble within a bust. And the whole concept is that the influx of investors into the housing market, this article says, may be exaggerating the extent and magnitude of the recovery in home sales and prices. I say it absolutely 100% is. Without a doubt, it is doing that. And this is what I wanted to show you. I sent this out to my real estate clients at the beginning of this month. If you'd like that newsletter, just let me know. I'll send it to you. But this is what I wrote. As we watch home prices balloon, with median prices jumping 20% in Sonoma County, where I'm at, 22% in Marin County, 29% in Solano County in 1 year. We know it's time to sell, but it may not be time to buy. Remember, rising prices are due to two things, in my opinion. Artificially low interest rates that are driving cash into something of value. And that article does talk about it. If you have money in a savings account, you're getting like a percent or 2% a year on it. People want, retirees in particular, others, they want income off that cash. And so they're looking at savings going, well, that sucks. And that is why one of those bubbles that the Fed is doing, they're squashing interest rates. They're artificially holding those rates down. And that forces the capital someplace else, which just bubbles those assets. That's what we're seeing. So the artificially low rates, all the retirees and all the people with money in the bank are saying, I can't make any money here. So, hey, property prices are low. Let's go buy property. And I have actually counted that, like it was an article last year, 30% of the entire home sales market in the 9 Bay Area counties last year was cash. The purchases were cash. In some counties, it was as high as 50%. So there's just billions and billions of dollars from people and foreigners flowing as cash into these prices. That's what's driving them up. And then the other thing that's risky, which this article didn't talk about, I've talked about a couple of weeks ago, is that millions of vacant foreclosures are not listed by the banks. They're holding them. Either of these market drivers, they're driving the market, low inventory, low interest rates. If either one of them shifts, it's going to have a massive shift in the market. If it drives cash out of the market, then prices are going to fall, because right now they're being pushed up because of cash offers. I know for a fact that many, many homes are listed saying things like, we're only looking at cash offers. So if you want to borrow money to buy this house, don't even bother offering. It's driving the buyers out. And I just briefly reminded my real estate clients about the thing we talked about in Vallejo, where that city has 1,000 vacant foreclosed homes. Of course, it's an attractive nuisance to vandals, but that number is about half of Vallejo's annual home sales. And so I counted vacant foreclosed properties. I'd try to add up all the properties that were foreclosed, look at all the sales from banks, bank-owned properties, and then subtract to see how many were left over. And I've done that for several markets, and it hangs around 50% of the annual sales of those markets are vacant foreclosures. So this is a tremendous shadow inventory that, you don't see very many articles about. That's why I bring it to your attention. And so, of course, I point out that at some point, either interest rates are going to rise, or banks are going to list the homes, or if they do end up selling them in bulk to hedge funds, which we've talked about repeatedly, at some point, those hedge funds are going to follow the steps of the initial hedge funds that got into rentals, and they're going to say, tenants, toilets, trash, I'm out of here. And they're going to be starting to dump thousands of homes on the property, trying to get out. And of course, the first ones that do this are going to get out with the highest prices. The rest of them are just going to force the prices down. So at that time, that's when we should be thinking about it. I'll try to keep you posted on what that's going to happen. But that's the time to buy. So think about your own situation. What are you facing? And, if you have any questions, just email me, please. Please don't call me. I probably won't call you back. I get too many calls. But email me and I can maybe give you a quick little email response. I'd appreciate that. So here's another thing that we really need to be aware of in the mortgage paper trail. And this is, I wanted to get this link in the comments. I want to talk about it because it's one of the most important aspects of fighting to keep your home, which is really what we're all trying to do and what we're about here, trying to help people keep their homes. And it's not enough to just accept what the banks give. You must secure the collateral and the custodial files and all electronic entries in the lender's accounting, financial, and general ledger systems and document custodian's tracking system. That's how you're going to be able to prove in court that they stole the home. So this is really important. You can read the article yourself. I don't want to spend any more time on it, but I did want to get that link in there and did want to make that statement because these are very important articles that people forward to me. And I did have to point this out. It really, is this a good idea? No, but it's so aggravating to me that, again, I've said this before, the powers that be, the district attorneys, the attorney general, they're going to go after you and me. So don't break any rules. They're not going to go after the banks. Those get a free pass right now. But anyone, so here we've got Novato. This is in Marin County. It's a real estate investor. Now he's been charged. They've been able to prove that he agreed to plead, and of course he agreed to plead guilty for his role in conspiracies, and they're rigging bids at foreclosure auctions. Basically, what he did was got together with other investors, and instead of bidding against each other, they basically said, okay, you buy that one we won't bid against you on that one. You don't bid against me on this one. And so they just took turns, and that's illegal. And see it down there, it says that they agreed to conspire not to bid against each other, but instead to designate a winning bidder to obtain selected properties at public real estate foreclosure auctions, both in San Francisco and San Mateo counties. And was that illegal? Yes. But again, you understand, we wouldn't even be having this problem if it wasn't for the fraudulent toxic loans and the fake and fraudulent foreclosures. So I just have to get my little zing in there because it pains me to see the people being charged when the banks get off. Now, we've got a couple of really hot guests today. I wanted to share with you Lawrence Lessig and how we can reclaim the public. And then we're going to talk to Shelly. She went to Tunisia for the World Social Forum and is going to bring us a report. I can hardly wait. So let's listen to what Lawrence says, and let's listen carefully to some of the numbers he quotes. And some states are already starting. We can do this. We can fix this in our state. So let's pay attention.
Once upon a time, there was a place called Lesterland. Now, Lesterland looks a lot like the United States. Like the United States, it has about 311 million people, and of that 311 million people, it turns out 144,000 are called Lester. If Matt's in the audience, I just borrowed that. I'll return it in a second, this character from your series. So 144,000 are called Lester, which means about 0.05% is named Lester. Now, Lesters and Lesterland have this extraordinary power. There are two elections every election cycle in Lesterland. One is called the general election. The other is called the Lester election. And in the general election, it's the citizens who get to vote, but in the Lester election, it's the Lesters who get to vote. And here's the trick. In order to run in the general election, you must do extremely well in the Lester election. You don't necessarily have to win, but you must do extremely well. Now, what can we say about democracy in Lesterland? Well, we can say, number one, as the Supreme Court said in Citizens United, the people have the ultimate influence over elected officials. Because after all, there is a general election. But only after the Lesters have had their way with the candidates who wish to run in the general election. And number two, obviously, this dependence upon the Lesters is going to produce a subtle, understated, we could say camouflaged bending to keep the Lesters happy. Okay, so we have a democracy, no doubt, But it's dependent upon the Leicesters and dependent upon the people. It has a competing dependencies, we could say conflicting dependencies, depending upon who the Leicesters are. Okay, that's Leicesterland. Now there are three things I want you to see now that I've described Leicesterland. Number one, the United States is Leicesterland. The United States is Leicesterland. The United States also looks like this, also has two elections. One we call the general election, the second we should call the money election. In the general election, it's the citizens who get to vote if you're over 18, in some states if you have an ID. In the money election, it's the funders who get to vote. The funders who get to vote. And just like in Leicesterland, the trick is to run in the general election, you must do extremely well. In the money election, you don't necessarily have to win. There is Jerry Brown, but you must do extremely well. And here's the key. There are just as few relevant funders in USA land as there are Leicesters in Leicesterland. Now you say, really? Really? 0.05%? Well, here are the numbers from 2010. 0.26% of America gave $200 or more to any federal candidate. 0.05% gave the maximum amount to any federal candidate. 0.01%, the 1% of the 1%, gave $10,000 or more to federal candidates. And in this election cycle, my favorite statistic is 0.000042%. For those of you doing the numbers, you know that's 132 Americans gave 60% of the super PAC money spent in the cycle we have just seen ending. So I'm just a lawyer. I look at this range of numbers, and I say it's fair for me to say it's 0.05% who are irrelevant funders in America. In this sense, the funders are our Leicesters. Now, what can we say about this democracy in USA land? Well, as the Supreme Court said in Citizens United, we could say, of course, the people have the ultimate influence over the elected officials. We have a general election, but only after the funders have had their way with the candidates who wish to run in that general election. And number two, obviously, this dependence upon the funders produces a subtle, understated, camouflaged bending to keep the funders happy. Candidates for Congress and members of Congress spend between 30 and 70% of their time raising money to get back to Congress or to get their party back into power. And the question we need to ask is, what does it do to them, these humans, as they spend their time behind a telephone calling people they've never met, but calling the tiniest slice of the 1%? As anyone would, as they do this, they develop a sixth sense, a constant awareness about how what they do might affect their ability to raise money. They become, in the words of the X-Files, shapeshifters, as they constantly adjust their views in light of what they know will help them to raise money, not on issues 1 to 10, but on issues 11 to 1,000. Leslie Byrne, a Democrat from Virginia, describes that when she went to Congress, she was told by a colleague, quote, always lean to the green. Then to clarify, she went on, he was not an environmentalist. So here, too, we have a democracy dependent upon the funders and dependent upon the people, competing dependencies, possibly conflicting dependencies depending upon who the funders are. Okay, the United States is Leicesterland, point number one. Here's point number two. The United States is worse than Leicesterland. Worse than Leicesterland. Because you can imagine in Leicesterland, if we Leicesters got a letter from the government that said, hey, you get to pick who gets to run in the general election, we would think maybe of a kind of aristocracy of the Leicesters. You know, there are Leicesters from every part of social society. There are rich Leicesters, poor Leicesters, black Leicesters, white Leicesters. Not many women Leicesters, but put that to the side 1 second. We have Leicesters from everywhere. We could think, what could we do to make Leicesterland better? It's at least possible the Leicesters would act for the good of Leicesterland. But in our land, in this land, in USA land, there are certainly some sweet Leicesters out there, many of them in this room here today, but the vast majority of the Leicesters act for the Leicesters. Because the shifting coalitions that are comprising the 0.05% are not comprising it for the public interest, it's for their private interest. In this sense, the USA is worse than Leicesterland. And finally, point number three. Whatever one wants to say about Leicesterland against the background of its history, its traditions, in our land, in USA land, Leicesterland is a corruption. A corruption. Now, by corruption, I don't mean brown paper bag cash secreted among members of Congress. I don't mean Rob Blagojevich sense of corruption. I don't mean any criminal act. The corruption I'm talking about is perfectly legal. It's a corruption relative to the framers' baseline for this republic. The framers gave us what they called a republic. But by a republic, they meant a representative democracy. And by a representative democracy, they meant a government, as Madison put it in Federalist 52, that would have a branch that would be dependent upon the people alone. So here's the model of government. They have the people and the government with this exclusive dependency. But the problem here is that Congress has evolved a different dependence. No longer a dependence upon the people alone, increasingly a dependence upon the funders. Now, this is a dependence too. But it's different and conflicting from a dependence upon the people alone so long as the funders are not the people. This is a corruption. Now, there's good news and bad news about this corruption. One bit of good news is it's bipartisan, equal opportunity corruption. It blocks the left on a whole range of issues that we on the left really care about. It blocks the right too, as it makes principled arguments of the right increasingly impossible. So the right wants smaller government. When Al Gore was vice president, his team had an idea for deregulating a significant portion of the telecommunications industry. The chief policy man took this idea to Capitol Hill, and as he reported back to me, the response was, hell no. If we deregulate these guys, how are we going to raise money from them? This is a system that's designed to save the status quo, including the status quo of big and invasive government. It works against the left and the right, and that, you might say, is good news. But here's the bad news. It's a pathological, democracy-destroying corruption. Because in any system where the members are dependent upon the tiniest fraction of us for their election, that means the tiniest number of us, the tiniest number of us can block reform. I know that should have been like a rock or something. I can only find cheese, I'm sorry. So there it is, block reform. Because there is an economy here, an economy of influence, an economy with lobbyists at the center, which feeds on polarization. It feeds on dysfunction. The worse that it is for us, the better that it is for this fundraising. Henry David Thoreau, there are 1,000 hacking at the branches of evil to one who is striking at the root. This is the roots. Okay, now, every single one of you know this. You couldn't be here if you didn't know this, yet you ignore it. You ignore it. This is an impossible problem. You focus on the possible problems, like eradicating polio from the world, or taking an image of every single street across the globe, or building the first real universal translator, or building a fusion factory in your garage. These are the manageable problems, so you ignore So you ignore this corruption, but we cannot ignore this corruption anymore. We need a government that works. And not works for the left or the right, but works for the left and the right, the citizens of the left and right, because there is no sensible reform possible until we end this corruption. So I want you to take hold, to grab the issue you care the most about. Climate change is mine, but it might be financial reform or a simpler tax system or inequality. Grab that issue, sit it down in front of you, look straight in its eyes and tell it there is no Christmas this year. There will never be a Christmas. We will never get your issue solved until we fix this issue first. So it's not that mine is the most important issue. It's not. Yours is the most important issue, but mine is the first issue. The issue we have to solve before we get to fix the issues you care about. No sensible reform, and we cannot afford a world, a future, with no sensible reform. Okay, so how do we do it? Turns out the analytics here are easy, simple. If the problem is members spending an extraordinary amount of time fundraising from the tiniest slice of America, the solution is to have them spend less time fundraising, but fundraise from a wider slice of America, to spread it out, to spread the funder influence so that we restore the idea of dependence upon the people alone. And to do this does not require a constitutional amendment changing the First Amendment. To do this would require a single statute, a statute establishing what we think of as small dollar funded elections, a statute of citizen-funded campaigns. And there are any number of these proposals out there. Fair Elections Now Act, the American Anti-Corruption Act, an idea in my book that I call the Grant and Franklin Project that give vouchers to people to fund elections, an idea of John Sarbanes called the Grassroots Democracy Act. Each of these would fix this corruption by spreading out the influence of funders to all of us. The analytics are easy here. It's the politics that's hard. Indeed, impossibly hard, because this reform would shrink K Street, And Capitol Hill, as Congressman Jim Cooper, a Democrat from Tennessee, put it, has become a farm league for K Street. A farm league for K Street. Members and staffers and bureaucrats have an increasingly common business model in their head, business model focused on their life after government, their life as lobbyists. 50% of the Senate between 1998 and 2004 left to become lobbyists, 42% of the House. Those numbers have only gone up. And as United Republic calculated last April, the average increase in salary for those who they tracked was 1,452%. So it's fair to ask, how is it possible for them to change this? Now, I get this skepticism. I get this cynicism. I get this sense of impossibility. But I don't buy it. This is a solvable issue. If you think about the issues our parents tried to solve in the 20th century, issues like racism, or sexism, or the issue that we've been fighting in this century, homophobia. Those are hard issues. You don't wake up one day no longer a racist. It takes generations to tear that intuition, that DNA out of the soul of a people. But this is a problem of just incentives. Just incentives. Change the incentives and the behavior changes. And the states that have adopted small dollar funded systems have seen overnight a change in the practice. When Connecticut adopted this system, in the very first year, 78% of the elected representatives gave up large contributions and took small contributions only. It's solvable. Not by being a Democrat, not by being a Republican. It's solvable by being citizens, by being citizens. Because if you want to kickstart reform, look, I could kickstart reform at half the price of fixing energy policy. I could give you back a republic. Okay, but
I'm going to stop it there because we need to move on, and you can finish it up. He's talking about some other examples. This is the key I want to leave with you. We can fix this. And I agree with him totally. This is issue number one. Not that it's most important, but it has to be solved first. So many of the issues that we look for for resolution require our elected officials to get involved. So until we get elected officials that are involved, that are going to support the people and the reforms the people want, we're batting our heads against a wall. So I really wanted to have you hear that. And the fact it is encouraging. Some states have already passed this. So let's go find out what those statutes are and let's push them to get them in our state, whatever state you're in. Let's push them throughout the country and shift the funding back to the people. So I'd like to welcome Shelly. Let's see if she's on the phone. Hey, Shelly, this is CJ. Are you on the phone with us today?
Yep.
Oh, thank you so much for joining us. So you went to Tunisia, is that right?
Yes. Hi, CJ. Nice to hear you live. That's right. I went to Tunisia for the World Social Forum, and I don't know how many people listening have heard of that or are familiar with it. I was never familiar with it until this year. I heard that it was happening in Tunisia, which sparked my interest to study it further and what it was. And as I learned more, I just knew that I had to go because actually this June, it will be 25 years since I served as a Peace Corps volunteer in Tunisia. And the World Social Forum is it's an annual event. This is the 12th annual, and it began in Brazil in 2001. And essentially what it is just people gathering from all over the world to address, the important issues of the day. And of course, there's so many happening today. There were literally 350 workshops a day to choose from. There were 50,000 people registered at the conference. And so it was a very, exciting event to be a part of. The most exciting thing I've ever been involved in, for sure. The opening day, well, I think that it's good to remember that the Arab Spring began in Tunisia. It started in December 2010 when the young man named Mohamed Bouazizi was selling fruits and vegetables on the street, and just to make ends meet to support his family. He had a bachelor's degree. He could not find work, and he was punished selling fruits and vegetables on the street without a permit, and that was just the end of the road for him. He lit himself on fire and died, and as a result, the Tunisian people took to the streets and overthrew their president. Ben Ali led the country. So that was the spark of the Arab Spring that led to the revolutions that are happening across the world, across the Arab world, and on to Occupy Wall Street. And I've always been a part of the Occupy movement. I've been grateful to the Tunisian people every step of the way for stopping these revolutions, for calling the attention to the injustices that are happening around the world. And it was the choice of the World Social Forum to meet in Tunisia this year in solidarity with the people of Tunisia.
That is so cool. I'm so glad you were able to go. So I've got on the screen now the countries that were represented there. This is just the 13th annual World Social Forum, right?
And CJ, those countries and so many more, those countries that you have listed there are the countries who I personally sat in on workshops and listened to representatives from those countries speak about what is happening in their countries with the housing crisis. So as I said, there were 350 workshops a day to choose from.
Oh my goodness.
I don't know how many countries total were represented, but as I said, there were 50,000 people registered. And so, because a lot of my Occupy involvement has been focused on, the housing crisis. Of course, it followed you from the day I met you, and that,
right.
Which has been a couple years we've been at this. So, I really searched through the workshops to find the ones that had to do with housing. And the biggest thing that I think people should note is the workshops were taught by an organization called International Alliance of Habitat.
Okay.
The website is just Habitat. It's spelled HABITANTS.org. So habitants.org. So these people are networked, and what the countries that you just had listed, I'll just say them quickly, who spoke. These countries are networked. I was impressed to see that they're dialed in with each other, and they're learning from each other about what solutions they're finding in their countries and how they can help each other. And I think that America needs to tap into that, because we know that we have a housing crisis in America. I was familiar that things were happening in Europe, but I had no idea that this is global. What is happening in America in the housing crisis is a global issue. The banks are doing this all over the world. We are by no means alone in what is happening. So the first workshop was titled International Meeting of Victims of the Housing Market. The second was called Zero Evictions and Stop Land Grabbing Campaign, supporting the popular sovereignty of the territories. So again, the countries represented were America, Italy, Germany, Argentina, Portugal, Spain, Poland, Morocco, Kenya, Dominican Republic, Haiti, Mexico, Venezuela, Chile, and Brazil. All of these guys came to talk about the housing crisis and what's happening with the banks in their country. So just know, it's everyone, I think it's good to tune into that website. You can get on their newsletter. They do a, an online newsletter, and we can start seeing what people are doing around the world. But I do want to share a couple of stories from individual countries, and I also wanted to add that a lot of the people that came to present were very young people. They were the youth that traveled from all of these countries to speak on behalf of their countries and what are happening there, and to learn from each other. So, for example, this young man from Kenya, when he got to the microphone, he thanked the young man from Italy and the young woman from Haiti who had given him information about how to solve the problem in Kenya.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, it's way cool. I was so impressed. And so there was a woman that spoke from America. She was actually the first speaker, which, was great. She came from Detroit.
Oh, boy.
She was with an organization called the Michigan Welfare Rights Organization. She said that 20,000 homes have been foreclosed on in Detroit.
Yeah.
This is, not a major surprise to us hearing this, but she said a large part of the problem was being a loss of jobs in the auto industry,
Yes.
predominantly affecting the African American community,
Yeah.
and that homes are being sold in bundles online at auctions. Okay, so these are all familiar things to all of us. Like, I
Right.
heard this, so I wasn't quite yet in shock. But I'm going to jump to the first story that is extremely moving. You won't believe what's happening with the country of Poland, and I think that each country varies in, how things are happening, and it's based on the history of the country, the geography of the country, the leadership of the country, the connectedness of the people within the country, and that's largely based on culture and how those people are used to working together. I think in America, one of the struggles that we're having is that we are an independently based nation. We grew up with the idea to take care of ourselves, and I think we all found that in the Occupy movement, we all had to kind of learn how to get along at a General Assembly and how to listen to each other and how to communicate, and I think other countries are better at this than America, and it's a lesson that we're learning, and that you'll see that some of these countries that already have that cultural connection are a little further along in their revolution. So,
Yeah.
Poland, a young woman spoke from Poland. She described that during World War II, in the city of Warsaw, the houses were largely decimated during the war. My kitty just came in. I'm sorry. Can't control it. So what happened as a result of that is that the government created public housing to rebuild the city, and tenants rented from the government at fixed prices. But in thank you, CJ, for putting up Yola's picture, because the story is
Yes.
about Yola.
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you. In 1989, private investors began networking with high-ranking officials and purchasing publicly owned homes. But again, there's similarities along the line. Private investors coming in to buy up the home.
And the government colluding with them to do this.
Yes, selling
Yes.
to them. Exactly.
Yes.
Thank you. So, and they began to raise the rents
Of course.
and increasing the debt of the tenant.
Of course.
This woman who you have on the screen, Yola Brzeska, was born in 1947, and she had lived her whole life in the same apartment building, and she worked as what they referred to as an archivist for the city of Warsaw, which is essentially our equivalent of the county recorder. She was the one with the documents,
Right.
responsible for the documents on the home ownership. The private investors that purchased her apartment building that she lived in, and I'm going to name them, were Mosakowski and Masasiki. I'm spelling this wrong, but I did send the information to CJ on this presentation. One was a private investor, one was a lawyer. They were a team of investors that worked together, and they gradually evicted all tenants from the apartment building that Yola lived in, and she was the last to leave. No, Sapphire. Sorry. The developers would break into her apartment late at night and often in the presence of the police, and they would harass her. Literally, they would unscrew the bolts from her door and break into her home at night.
Oh my goodness.
She fought the investors that purchased the apartment building in court, and received no support.
Right.
He then established the Warsaw Tenants' Rights Association to establish solidarity among the people because she knew that the people needed to unite to fight this. She was very much aware of what was happening from the bottom to the top. She had pieced together all of the key players on up to the government. So what ended up happening was in 2011, Yola was murdered. Her body was found in the forest, burned, with her hands tied behind her back, and it was called a suicide.
Right.
There's never been an investigation. These investors, the buyers of her building, were never brought to trial.
Right.
And this young woman traveled from Poland to ask people around the world to go to Polish embassies in their countries, their towns, their cities, across the world with that picture that you just showed of Yola and hold that up to the windows at Polish embassies and say, what happened to Yola?
Right.
And you don't let this story die because the Polish government, they believe what is going to move them more than anything is embarrassment. She said the Polish government does not like to be embarrassed. So that, I think is the most profound story that I heard in my whole 4 days in this social forum. So I'll move on to a few other countries. CJ, did you want to say anything at that point before I name a few more?
Shelley, what is so amazing, because I've been looking, Shelly wrote to me briefly a summary of each of these countries, and what's so amazing to me, and I'm somewhat puzzled by it, other than the fact that the bankers, the central bankers, the investors want the land, but I am just shocked that these people are losing their homes around the planet. It just, I don't know what to say.
Yeah. I know, it's quite discouraging, and yet, on some level, right, we're not alone. Also all day when I was sitting in these workshops, I just kept saying to myself, why? Why is this happening?
Exactly.
Is this global takeover from every country in the world? It is happening everywhere. And if you go to that website that I just gave you, the Habitants, or whatever I just said, that you will see the number, there it is, the number of countries that this is happening, because countries around the world are posting their stories there. So I'll move on to a few more, PJ, to tell you what's happening in other countries. Italy, there's been a 50% reduction of value in homes. 1 in every 400 families have been evicted from their homes. They're networking between what they call militant families and lawyers to resist the evictions.
So I guess we would be called militant families.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Oh my goodness.
I like it. So the woman from Portugal gave up the stage to turn it over to a woman from Spain, because she said, we're looking to Spain right now from Portugal, because Spain is having some impact. They're making some changes, and here's the story from Spain. What's interesting is that they're having a huge crisis. As we know, we've seen in the news much about Spain in terms of debt and the housing crisis there. But what happened, at the same time subprime lending was going on here in America, it was going on in Spain as well, too.
Of course it was.
Immigrants who are coming to the country of Spain and trying to find a place to rent, they made it virtually impossible for them to rent. They required lots of document, paperwork, proof of income, proof of employment, on and on. And it never ended. And oftentimes they would not ever rent to them at all because they made the request so stringent. But you want to buy a house? No problem.
No problem.
No problem.
Oh my goodness.
That was easy. You could get a house, but you couldn't rent.
It's called fraudulent inducement, and that's Catherine Austin Fitts' words. And exactly, they fraudulently induced the people to sign their names to documents which they've securitized and sold multiple times so they could cheat the investors, build in tremendous wealth for themselves. And in the end, the brunt of it, of course, is on the people, because the governments refused to force the banks to fail. They bailed them out.
So what happened? They started losing jobs a few years
Of
later,
course.
couldn't pay their mortgages.
Yep.
were evicted and still forced to pay back 40% of their home loans.
Oh my goodness. See, here in this country, it depends on the state, but in California, if you use the money to purchase the house, it's called purchase money, and it's upside down, you can't be forced. There's no lender recourse to go after you to get you to pay that back. But that's what Shelly's saying, that in Spain, they force the people out and then they still make them pay it off.
Right. So the people of Spain organized, and here's what they're doing in Spain. And this is one of the model countries to watch right now. So they organize as collectives of families and as neighbors to resist and prevent the eviction. They meet in squares and they have alliances everywhere. If they find something that's working, they tell everyone.
Right.
Families go collectively together to negotiate loans to the bank, and if they refuse, the families collectively occupy the bank. If they're evicted from their homes, they return to their homes collectively with families to occupy the home, and they use the media to show that the evictions were illegal.
So Shelly, evidently the media would actually, broadcast that information that the evictions are illegal? Because we have that problem here.
These are presentations that I took notes on, so I think we would have to research that in depth.
Right.
To find out about the media, but that's what they worked on. The second part is that they worked to change laws to prevent the evictions.
Right.
They've got a petition demanding that people be allowed to stay in their homes, and petitions submitted to Parliament there, they only need 500,000 signatures, but they gathered 1.5 million signatures on this petition and delivered it to Parliament. And then they addressed each individual member of Parliament and asked them if they were supporting that petition. So that's the Spain model.
And I believe, Shelly, I've been looking at the notes as you've been sharing this with the viewers, and I believe that there's some good items in here that we could model our own efforts after. One of the biggest problems, and I think you hit on it a few sentences ago, and that is this country, the way we have grown up, has been independent. And so we don't have, other than just your local families, which may be, in some other state clear across the country, we don't have this organization amongst ourselves to where, you just walk down the street and talk to all your neighbors, and it's easy to organize a street. I mean, I'm going to ask our viewers, and I'm asking myself, how many of the neighbors on your street do you know? Have you even spoken to in the last year? Think about that. And I think that is one of our biggest weaknesses that the banks are capitalizing on right now.
Right. Well, the Occupy movement, beginning with the encampments, I think it was a powerful time where people were gathering together, and of course the police enforcement cracking down on all that. And I personally didn't see that encampments were a sustainable way of going about the activism, but that it was a point to draw attention to the problems, and that we need to hold on to that momentum, and to find ways to reconnect with each other and work together to, impact these changes. I mean, CJ, I know you're a leading revolutionary in all of this, and, it definitely takes leaders. I know the Occupy movement was, about being leaderless, but it does require leadership like you that keep it all rolling and, held together. So let me give just a quick more little examples here, because I know time's running, but Dominican Republic, what's interesting there is that they stated that they have a strong history of housing cooperatives for two main reasons. One, that there has been a history of forced eviction supported by the government there.
Yes.
Two, there are natural disasters that occur there, such as hurricanes and floods that force people from their homes. So for those two reasons, people are accustomed to uniting and working together to support each other. They did mention that if they resist these forced evictions by the government, that they can be imprisoned, that they can be beaten, and that sometimes there is even death that can occur if they resist the eviction. So what the people of the Dominican Republic have done is that they formed cooperatives, and they're member cooperatives, and they pay a membership dues or fees or to be a part of these cooperatives, and they use that money to house homeless people. And these cooperatives have housed 300 families in the Dominican Republic so far.
Boy, that's just so amazing to me that literally, they'll kill the people to get them out of their houses.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you want me to take a minute, I can tell you the saddest story of Haiti, and then I'll wrap it up with Venezuela, which was the most positive note. But, Haiti, again, as I'm saying, is talking from the beginning that it's about the history, the geography, the politics. And Haiti, of course, is most devastating. I mean, before the earthquake that hit there a few years ago, there were 300,000 people experiencing a housing shortage already. And then 175,000 homes were destroyed during the earthquake. 3 years later, only 13,000 of those homes have been rebuilt, and 6,000 new homes have been built. So there are still 350,000 homeless people in Haiti today.
Shelly, did they say why only so few houses have been built? Did they talk about that?
I mean, to me, it sounded like it was an obvious non-priority. I mean, right? I don't know, CJ.
Okay. Again,
these lectures just went by really quick.
Exactly, but I'm telling you, after all of this aid, I just feel like there's this huge gap. What's missing? Well, probably the aid just went into the pockets of the wealthy, and then they forget about the homeless. I guess I just don't know what is going on. That is amazing. So they're still living in what, encampments and tents?
Yeah, well, but they're evicting them from the encampments even. They're lighting those encampments on fire. There was one lit on fire that 100 families were living in. And the impression that I got, what I understood from her, is that these encampments are sometimes below, like, wealthier neighborhoods that look down on them, and they're kind of unsightly. So some are being paid to leave the encampment, and they're being relocated into homes that were damaged by the quake, unsafe shelters to exist in. So what they're doing in Haiti, in Port-au-Prince, they've organized, and they're supporting people in the camp and working to prevent the forced evictions until public or affordable housing is made available. They're working with the government to provide funding for affordable housing, which is what you're asking, CJ, and they're working to keep the issues in the media. So that's Haiti, and I mean, all these stories just break your heart. But the final one is Venezuela, and everyone was saying the only country that's finding solutions to ending this is Venezuela. And they look to, their slogan in Venezuela that evictions are against human rights, and they look to the United Nations Pact on Economic and Social Rights. They use political support. Cesar Chavez was a supporter of their efforts. He provided funding for the media, which enabled their message to be spread across the country, even to those people who weren't being impacted by the housing crisis. They also gathered signatures for a petition. They gathered 700,000 asking for popular law on housing rights.
And Shelly, that's not the first time I've heard the phrase housing is a right or should be a right. And I think we need to explore that. How do you balance the right to housing with, the cost of housing? Because there's always a cost involved. But in the comment, you've written down and mentioned the UN Pact on Economic and Social Rights. I don't know anything about that. I think we need to pursue that.
Yeah, but that's what they look to in Venezuela, a United Nations Pact.
Right.
If this global effort can coalesce, and I think, I'm very honored to be the voice that brought back this message to America, and I hope this goes far and wide, that we can connect globally because we are not alone.
And let's never, ever forget Iceland, who threw the bankers in prison, who reneged on all of those mortgages, said they're all toxic and fraudulent induced, so we're just not going to pay them. Take that. Right. And their people have their homes. Their economy is doing well. So why can't we do that here?
Right, I know.
And everywhere.
I'm trying to remember where there was one country where actually there were two judges working in support of the people and had rewritten
Right. We call it in this country. It's been referred to as a cram down. They would cram down the first. In general, in our loan rules, if there's a first loan and then a second, the bankruptcy judge, if you're in bankruptcy, already has the right to wipe off the second if the value of the home is below the value of the first. But the judges don't yet have any authority to cram down that first to the principal. And the whole point is, and everybody needs to constantly remember, that the only reason the housing prices bubbled in the first place was because of these toxic, fraudulent loans. If they had actually done correct underwriting and had, honest numbers about the people's income and about their down payments and about their monthly payments, the prices never would have bubbled. The only reason they bubbled up so high fraudulently is because, as I have said before, maybe you've heard me, in 2004 for $1,500 a month you could get $400,000, and in 2006 you could get $600,000 for the same payment. The monthly payments were completely non-related to the amount loaned, and that's just basically fraudulent. It was a cheat. They've cheated the people. They forced this housing bubble. They've benefited from it in more ways than we can possibly count. And obviously they've been doing this around the planet. And in fact, I really hate to say it, the more I see how much our bankers, we call them their federal banks, and we talk about the big five and how they have exported this pain and suffering to the planet. I'm really ashamed. I'm really ashamed. And I feel that this country, the citizens in this country, really need to take that to heart and to step up and insist that our representatives break them up. They must be broken up. They need to be going to prison. We need to have them prosecuted.
Yeah, I think that, in conclusion, that is what's happening around the world, is that the people, they're uniting and they're working to change policy at the top. It's how it has to be. And I know you preach on this stuff a lot too. And so I think it's good to, connect with our comrades, our brothers and sisters around the world who are in the same struggle, and, we're in it together.
Absolutely. Oh, Shelly, thank you so much for sharing with us today. I'm so delighted that you had the resources and the time and took the effort to go to Tunisia. I had no idea that you were a volunteer 25 years ago in the Peace Corps.
It was crazy to go back at this time in history. 25 years later, to march the streets with those people. On the opening day of the forum, we marched the streets, and they estimated there may have been between 60 and 70,000 people in the streets. And the Tunisians were so grateful to have the world come and support them, because they've been a little down and out, right, in their revolution. And they had no idea. I don't think they had any idea how much they have influenced the rest of the world. And people treated us so graciously. Shop owners were so happy to have the tourism dollars, and just
absolutely,
we were treated so well the whole entire time, and it was a blast to be there. Happiest day of my life, marching that street with 70,000 people.
Oh, I'm envious, actually, because we would love to have that many people here.
I do want to say there is a U.S. Social Forum happening next year in the United States.
Okay.
It happened here in 2010 in Detroit, I believe, so there's another one upcoming. There is a website. You can do a search on U.S. Social Forum. We will be there. It hasn't been determined yet, the date or the location. They're in the point of asking for donations and, support and stuff and getting it going, but let's watch it. It'll be there, it'll be in America next year. So, or the U.S. Social Forum, the World Social Forum, I think next year will be in Montreal, Canada. So we can go there too.
And Shelly, can you just please keep us updated so we can put it on the calendar, we can post it, and truly those more fortunate among us might even consider sponsoring people from Tunisia to go to these world forums.
Oh, that's beautiful. Yeah, and I think that, it's the kind of place where you could go and do a presentation. You could have a booth set up for, homeowners for justice. And this is where the U.S. and definitely Mark Armstrong, public banking, Ellen Brown,
absolutely.
all
absolutely.
of the key leaders leaders of so many organizations across America. That's where we come and we work together.
Absolutely. And truly, we need, the common misery hopefully will connect us so that we can have a common solution. Because truly, the solutions are political. And like we just showed just before you're sharing with us on the show, the fact of the matter is if we shifted the way our representatives were funded, we would get more representatives of the people that didn't look to the federal or state legislature as a revolving door. We just want to, go make $1 billion for ourselves and forget everybody else. We wouldn't be forced to elect those people that have already been pre-elected. And I know for a fact, my personal experience since many years ago, decades ago, when I was in my 20s. We won't talk about how many decades. I have felt from the beginning that I never had a choice in electing a president, for example.
Wow.
And I believe that today, seeing it actually graphically presented, that the only people that we get to pick from are those that have already been pre-selected by the funders.
Mm-hmm.
That's the truth. And it's been that way for a lot of this country. And we now have the media, we have the internet, we have social media, we have other tools that could bring down this empire. As I don't know if many of you have seen The Empire Strikes Back and the Star Wars trilogy, but I do think about that fairly frequently, where the rebel troops were trying to save the people and bring down the empire.
Yeah, a lot of that was filmed in Tunisia, which is great. I do want to tell you, and I know I've told you this story before, and bless you, 60 people still listening, because I know we've gone over time, but I'd like to end it with this short little quick story it's a children's story from Tunisia, and I've told you before, CJ. It's a story called The Bird and the Elephant. And I believe this has a lot to do with why the Tunisian people could be really key in leading these revolutions, because these are the children's stories they grew up with, not Cinderella and the handsome prince coming to save you. No,
Right.
This is what the Tunisian grew up with, is that there's a bird that has a nest on the ground in like a savanna, and she's flown away. And there's eggs, and the elephant comes, marching through the savanna, and he sees that nest of eggs, and with no regard, he just steps on them and smashes them and keeps going. And the bird flies back and sees the elephant walking away from the nest, and the bird's all crushed, and she starts to cry, or the eggs are crushed. She starts to cry, and she flies off to her flock of bird friends and tells them what the elephant has done. And all of the birds collectively fly together to the elephant, and they swoop down on the elephant and collectively poke his eyeballs out with their beaks. And because the elephant can no longer find food, he can't see, the elephant falls down and dies. The end.
That's a pretty straightforward.
That's a children's story.
And
Whereby,
graphic children's
to me,
story.
that's the 99% story. Those birds are the 99%.
Exactly.
Joining together to fight that one big beast, the elephant, and collectively they can do that.
Right. It's a graphic story, but it will stick in our heads. And this is what we're trying to do. We are trying to go find that flock of birds to join with us. And that's the only way that we're going to be able to fight back against this elephant literally stomping on people's houses and their lives with no regard. I mean, I can't even imagine. I couldn't have imagined what we're going through today just 5 years ago. Trust me. And it's just so amazing.
I know. I'm in awe all the time. So we'll end it on that sweet little metaphor. I don't want to take over your time. I really, really thank you for giving me the space to share these stories.
Oh, Shelly, we just thank you so much for your support and your ability to bring these stories to us. We really appreciate it, because literally it takes all of us. It's all about the flock of birds. We're all a bird. Let's get together and let's flock and let's fly. Thank you so much for that sharing and for that story and for the report from the world. And truly, let's connect with our compatriots around the planet. I swear to you, the people will love the people everywhere. It's not about the people. It's about the government folks that have been in charge that are just taking over and ruin it for the people. Thanks.
All right, CJ, carry on.
Thank you. Thank you. And with that, guys, we're going to have to sign off. We thank you so much for joining us again today. And we're going to end again with our Austerity All-Stars. We just love their song. And we'll see you tomorrow.
Bye.
Bye.
When I was a lass, I was proud of me class, like my father and mother before me. They taught me to fight for my civil rights, but it's always the same old story. The rich reign supreme while the poor can but dream, under Labour or Liberal or Tory. And I say, bugger the bankers and politicians, bugger the bureaucrats too, bugger the buggers who make up the rules, and if you're one of them, bugger you, and if you're one of them, bugger you.
The system is bent and the money's all spent. We're measured from every direction. The workers get taxed while the wealthy relax.
With nary a moment's reflection. When it's grass, there's muck, and they don't give an ass, 'cause they're programmed against insurrection. And I say, bugger the bankers and politicians, bugger the bureaucrats too, bugger the buggers who make up the rules, and if you're one of them, bugger you, and if you're one of them, bugger you. Now all you good people with passion to vent, don't give up the struggle for justice. But I've done my time on the protesters' line, and these days I show my dissent.